A very good morning to all who are joining us for the special session on D Talks or Disruptive Literacy Talks. I'm your host, Mashood Bhatt. And these are exciting times for the disruptive foundation literacy and numeracy movement and all the stakeholders who are associated with it, especially because of the recent announcement by the Union Minister for Education just 2 days back on the launch of the Nipun Bharat Mission or the National Initiative for Proficiency in Reading with Understanding and Numeracy. The goal of this mission, and this is something which all of us had been waiting for after the National Education Policy announced it last year, the goal will be to ensure that every child in the country attains FLN skills or foundational literacy and numeracy skills by the end of grade 3 within the next 6 to 7 years. The target is being set as 27. And to really demystify what will it take for a national mission on FLN to be successful, what has worked in FLN in the past, and what are the learnings. We have a very special and eminent guest who will be speaking on how we can rebuild back better for FLN. Our guest today is the co-managing director at Central Square Foundation. She has also been the founding member, one of the founding members of CSF. She leads the CSF strategy in operations, strategic partnerships, and is also leading CSF's work on foundational literacy and numeracy across various domains of systemic reforms, government projects, classroom instruction, and the overall organizational development of CSF. It's an honor for us to have and welcome Ms. Shweta Sharma Kukreja. Shweta, thank you so much for finding time. Thank you. So before we start, I would like to also tell our audience who are joining us live on YouTube and Facebook as well. We would encourage you to share your questions as well. The format that we'll follow is Shweta has a wonderful presentation for us to start things over. And after that, we'll be having an interaction where Dr. Sunita Gandhi, convener at Detox, is also expected to join. We would also like to take questions and comments from the audience and bring them for our panel as well. So, Shweta ji, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mashood. Thank you, Sunita. Pleasure to be here, and a big welcome to our audience who are joining us for the live stream, and hopefully the many others who will hear it later. Very excited to be talking at a forum which is focused on foundational literacy and numeracy. Very fortunate it's in the same week when Nipun Bharat as a mission has been launched by the Ministry of Education for all children in India. I will keep the focus of my presentation on two parts. Give a brief overview on how we as CSF, what is our point of view on FLN, and a system reform lens to how will it actually come together on the ground for our teachers and most importantly for our children. And in the second part, I want to focus on what does this mean in the post-COVID world? How do the term build back better is being used across the world, across the ecosystem for all social issues, specifically in education for early learning. How do we now need to be prepared for a solution that stays relevant in the through COVID and post-COVID world? Just starting with giving a brief overview about my organization, Central Square Foundation. Our vision is to focus on quality school education for all children in India from a lens of system reform. Our priority areas are foundational learning, which is basically early literacy and numeracy. The second area that we've always focused on is to look at technology and education. How can technology actually be leveraged to augment children's learning, to augment capacity building in the system? And last, a very relevant area from an Indian perspective is how do we ensure that the quality of education in our private school system gets strengthened in a scalable manner? Those are our focus areas. Our approach is based on three parameters. We look at it from the political salience of an issue. One of the first principles of system reform in all our work has been that we need to create the relevant salience for policy reform, for change to be owned by the system and for change to actually occur at scale. This becomes most important. How do we build that collective voice? with NGOs and CSOs so that it becomes relevant from a bureaucratic, political, and an academic perspective. The second approach is to look at the supply side of solutions and build relevant evidence around it. And the spirit is, can we create public goods which are available for everyone to adopt and adapt in their particular context? Not everyone needs to start creating a solution from the first step. If strong public goods are made available to the education system, to other NGOs, to the government system, can they be tweaked to the context? And these are all evidence based. These are approaches, these are academic pedagogical tools which have shown efficacy in their pilots and are now available for scale up in other geographies. The last is a focus on demonstrating exemplars within state. How can we partner with the government to actually bring about the change on the ground in the classrooms, have exemplar evidence getting built in sites which are in state? Because at the end of the day, for us to get any change which is scalable and sustainable and available to all our children every academic year, it has to be owned by the system. So that's a little bit about CSF. Let's talk about the most exciting thing that's happened in education since the launch of our new education policy. We actually, as a country, have now taken on the mandate of foundational literacy and numeracy as a national mission by the name Nipun Bharat. Again, just to set the context, which a lot of the audience might already be aware of, the skills of early learning are actually gateway skills. If our children are not able to learn to read in their early years, then they tend to start falling behind, because from middle school onwards, they're actually expected to read to learn. And I feel that when we are talking early learning, we are not just talking of a cognitive skill or an academic skill. It's a life skill to be able to read with meaning, to be able to read with understanding and do basic arithmetic operations. Data of our education system, whether we look at the National Achievement Survey of the government or the ASR data, which gets published every year, the gateway skills, when children are not able to realize that in grade 3, then the gap in attainment actually keeps increasing. And then they reach an inflection point where, unfortunately, the children who have got left behind will continue to be left behind and they are not able to catch up. In fact, even at a global level, World Bank recognizes this and they call it the challenge of learning poverty. And when they stack the different countries of the world, unfortunately, right now, where India stands is that 55% of our children suffer from learning poverty. And the way World Bank articulates it is that for us to do well on any sustainable development goals, reduction of learning poverty becomes one of the most important first steps towards realizing any other sustainable development goal. So that's just to put in context the extent of the problem. However, very fortunately, we are at the new education policy that came out after almost 4 decades, put the agenda of FLN in a very central theme. In fact, the policy goes as far as saying that unless we can fix the early learning challenge in our country at a system level, then anything else that the policy refers to will not come to realization. And the next step of that has actually been the launch of the mission on National Initiative for Proficiency in Reading with Understanding and Numeracy, Samajh Ke Padhna, and the ability to do basic arithmetic, which basically become life skills irrespective of the education and the economic journey that any child takes in future. This got launched on Monday at the start of this week. It's been adopted by the country in a form of a mission, and we are very excited about what Nipun Bharat will now enable us to do for all the children of our country, both from a literacy and a numeracy perspective. I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about how CSF views system reform for FLN and what we are working with a few states and supporting other states do in terms of adopting the mission at a state level. I think for us, the basic principles continue to be that it has to be institutionalized at a state level. It has to be system owned. And can the tools and solutions being created be made available as public goods across states, across geographies, across partners? Uh, the four key pillars of system reform, as we call it, are the first one is goal setting and communication. uh, it becomes very important for the entire system. And a very ambitious articulation would be right from the chief minister and education minister of the state to the parent whose child is going to a primary school. Does everyone understand what do we mean? What is our goal for Nipun Bharat? बच्चे को समझ के पढ़ना उस लेवल पे लाने के लिए what are the sub skills? The technical terms are letter sound recognition to decoding to blending. What are those steps towards realization of the goal? Is there clarity? Is there complete alignment? And are they being communicated in a transparent and transparent and a timely manner? The second focuses on, I'm talking about the second and third pillar together, which becomes core, the academic and the pedagogical solution, the appropriate teaching learning material, and the teacher professional development. If we know we want our kids to be able to read with meaning, what is the pedagogical solutions? What are the materials? And incredible work has been done by NGOs in India and by state governments, SCRT, diets, and the departments on what that teaching material needs to look like. What we need under Nipun Bharat is to look at it in an integrated manner where all teaching learning material talks to the learning outcome framework that we set out as a goal, whether it's our lesson plans, workbook for practice, very importantly, our assessment framework, which allows us to know the health of the system and how our children are learning, where do they need additional support, where do they need more practice, how do we integrate the teaching learning material, including resources for the classroom, and how do we then build the capacity of our teachers, of our academic support layer towards effective use of that teaching learning material in the classroom. The final pillar is to look at it from a monitoring and assessment framework for every state to actually have a system which captures not just the administrative and input data for Nipun Bharat, but very importantly, the learning data. How are we doing vis-a-vis the goals? And to be able to use it for decision making so that the right interventions, right support, and right iterations on the program design can be made. Supporting this four-pillar approach, of course, will be innovations in terms of how we look at adoption of the material, how do we look at behavior change for the teaching professional development and the mentor support to actually convert into learning in the classroom. And a big learning from COVID also has been the critical role of parent and community engagement towards realizing early learning for our children. So this is a snapshot of how CSF looks at a system reform approach for FLN. For the second part of the presentation, I actually wanted to talk about a topic which has been personally close to my heart. I think it's something that has genuinely been a big area of concern and discussion across education NGOs in the country and actually in the world. That now post-COVID, where our children haven't come to school for all of last year, there is no visibility on when they will be able to come back to school. How do we then focus our efforts on building back better? What are the solutions we need to ensure that what our children have missed out on, their forgotten learning, their missed learning, and the social emotional support they will need to come back to school, to come back to learning, how do we design solutions for that? Just sharing a framework that we at CSF have put together in how we've looked at the issues of the problem. And of course, there are, again, full credit to our governments in different states, a lot of the NGOs which have tried to address it. But clearly, because there was no guidebook for, and this was a first-time pandemic that we are seeing in our lifetime, we didn't have a reference to how to design solutions. We've put a framework that we're internally calling our Akram framework of how do we look at solutions for the post-COVID world around access, content, roles, adoption, and monitoring. The slide that's up on your screen quotes data from different studies, including one which was put out by the Azim Premji University, some work which has been done by EdTech organizations supporting early learning for children going to government or low-income schools. The challenge continues to be that the percentage of children who actually have access to online learning, who are actually able to consume the content with support at home or in the community and be able to convert it into learning, is where we have significantly fallen short. Uh, Again, like I said, there are different pilots and different initiatives which have tried to address these gaps, but a solution which addresses all the multiple steps which are required for learning to continue at home, we've unfortunately fallen short in a comprehensive manner. Again, to give a snapshot, we just sharing some of the solutions which have been tried by different NGO partners. Language and Learning Foundation, one of our close partners, supported 80,000 children in an initiative in Haryana on Har Ghar School. This was centered on physical material and physical interaction. So it was a low-tech solution, all the way to where Convergence and Leadership for Equity, another two of our partners, were used an assessment board, so a more high-tech online solution to support early learning. The other two examples the slide on your screen talks about is Madhi's work under their Happy Learners program for 20,000 children in early grades in Tamil Nadu. Sarthi, another one of our partner organizations, has supported learning for early grades with about 10,000 students in communities in and around Delhi. And we've tried to study how different programs and different initiatives within the constraints of the geographies they support have scored on access, content, adoption, monitoring, and adaptability of the solution. The spirit is more to say that as we now prepare for the fact that our children need to be back to school, how do we support them to cover up what's been missed in academic year 2021 and what looks like will continue to be missed in the current academic year. And if we look at it from the perspective of the key challenges we need to address, the problem is at three levels. I think first and foremost is the challenge of equity. We've all been proud of the fact that India as a country, to a large extent, we had overcome our enrollment problem. Children were coming to school and we had to focus on quality. But unfortunately, due to the social and economic impact of COVID, we now have children who've actually dropped out of schooling. And how do we ensure that that gets addressed? In fact, one of the first guidelines, even from the Ministry of Education to the states, calls out the need to focus on enrollment, the need to focus on equity, and also children who are coming back to school would have had very varied experiences over the last 16 odd months of access to high quality learning at home. The second challenge is the learning loss. Our children haven't had a chance to revise what they were taught when they last went to school. And just take a moment to accept and acknowledge the fact these are children who last went to school in grade -2. So a child who is supposed to come to grade 3 next year would have forgotten everything she learned in grade 1, didn't get a chance to come to school in grade 2. So how do we make up for the missed and the forgotten learning? And the third aspect is that we do not have visibility on what will a new normal post-COVID look like. Can we plan for a normal academic year where the child will continue to come to school on a continuous basis? Or if there is still valid concerns of a wave 3 or a wave 4, or that the pandemic will not one fine day just leave the country and we have to learn with it, then how do we design for the disruptions which might come up in the future? So how do we solve for equity? How do we solve for the forgotten and missed learning? And how do we design a solution which stays relevant to anticipated disruptions in the future? This is the context of the problem that we need to address. And what I'm sharing now is our recommendation on what are the 10 steps which will be essential to overcome this. I think first and foremost, again, the equitable access needs to be ensured. There's a lot of displacement which has happened due to migration. There's a lot of dropout which has happened due to economic hardship. Specifically, when we look at from a gender lens, how do we ensure equitable access is once again available to all children in our country? That'll be step one. Second, it will be important for us to focus on the physical infrastructure and space. How does the COVID appropriate behavior and protocols be adhered in a average government school or an average low income school in our country? Third, we need to accept the fact, recognize it, and give its due credit to the need for social and emotional well-being for our children. There'll be children who will walk into grade 3 directly without ever having gone to a Balvatika or a primary grade. Children have forgotten what it means to come into a school, to learn from peers, to work with their teachers, to work with their classmates. How do we prepare a school readiness program to welcome back to school? Becomes central to how we look at reopening schools. The second theme we need to look at, where our recommendations 4th, 5th, and 6th talk about, is how do we look at the curriculum? And our explicit request and suggestion is to focus on foundational literacy and numeracy. How do we ensure that the focus on these early learning skills get across to our people? Second is, how do we prioritize our sorry about that, yeah. So how do we focus on the early learning skill? And second, how do we look at our curriculum and restructure it with a prioritized lens for learning? To expect that we will be able to go back to the curriculum which existed pre-COVID, where our children post their forgotten and missed learning will now be an inability to consume the curriculum as is a fallacy. And we need to structure it to be relevant to the post-COVID school opening. The other very important lever then becomes, how do we assess the learning level of the children? That becomes the starting point on which we then focus and get the academic journey started for when they are back in school. The last category of our recommendations is around the role of different stakeholders. Our teachers, our academic support staff, our mentors also need to be supported through this transition. What are the kind of professional development and support that needs to be provided to them for the new approach towards curriculum and learning? How do we continue to engage our parents and community for learning? We've had to lean on them quite extensively through COVID. The idea, of course, is not to pass on the responsibility of education to the parent and community, but how can they play a key enabling and a facilitator role to ensure that also for any future disruption, how can the teaching learning time at home be added to the child's learning? We've had quite a few successful pilots on community volunteers and how they have been able to support the continuity in learning, whether it's in mohalla classes, whether it's through reaching out to children at their home. And I think that's a very powerful tool that is available to us in the ecosystem, and how can that be leveraged effectively? Our last recommendation is to move towards a more decentralized decision making. As we look at how different states, different geographies have responded, there are quite a few interesting examples of how certain districts have taken on more innovative approaches to respond to COVID, whether on a low-tech solution, whether on more innovative sources of being able to finance the printing and distribution of physical material. And also the way COVID will likely play out, even the decision to open schools or to do mohalla classes or to do staggered small group school attendance might not be standardized at a state level. Depending on COVID infection rates and vaccination coverage, can different districts be empowered to make that decision? So that's the perspective I wanted to share from Central Square Foundation on what is a comprehensive set of solutions that we need to design for as we seek to build back better. I'll not get into too many details. I've shot over my time by a couple of minutes, but just wanted to capture how the learning journey needs to be designed to cover for both the forgotten learning from 2 years before, the missed learning for what unlikely looks to be a steady academic year with open schools even in our current year, and how does that need to be factored into the design going forward. With that, I'm at the end of my presentation and look forward to Sunita joining me for the discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta, for that very insightful presentation. I think you've really covered a lot of ground onto what exactly the concept of FLN should be looked at, how it has been looked at, and what it really takes to launch this mission successfully. So here, I would like to also invite Sunita Gandhiji as well, to who all of us who has been very intently listening to the presentation as well. I think to start with, one aspect which you mentioned in your presentation was about systemic reform, right, towards FLN. And uh, if we look at India, such a big country with so much diversity in its structures, in its the political agendas, in terms of the progress that has been made in education, and there's so much diversity. So overall, if you look at what are the challenges and also the opportunities when we are working with state governments in the field of foundation literacy and numeracy. Would you like to share what CSF's experience has been regarding this?
Sure, Mashood. Fortunately, I think the interest in early learning or the recognition of the need for it has existed even before the mission got launched, and I think that foresight exists at a state government level, not just at a central government level. And we've been fortunate to be working with states like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, and Gujarat already on looking at a system reform view to early learning. I think states realize that children have been coming to school, but the quality of learning that they need in their early years to be set up for successfully completing their middle school and high school journey is where there has been a breakdown. The breakdown has been and again, right, I'll go back to the four pillar approach that I spoke about, right? Is there complete clarity on what needs to get done? And is every stakeholder clear on their role, including that of a parent? As a parent, my job is not just to send my kid to school, but to take an interest in whether or not my child is learning and how can I support that learning at home, even if it's a playway method. So goal setting and that common messaging across that value chain becomes important. Do we have the right tools and materials for children to attain literacy and numeracy in their early grades? It needs to go beyond textbooks. Textbooks cannot anchor early learning. Is there a print-rich material? Is the classroom environment conducive to learning? Are appropriate practice sheets available? Do we have a strong assessment-informed instruction approach where we know how our children are progressing? And I think state governments have, in our experience, been very open and supportive to do a diagnostic, to understand what the current capability of the solutions and tools is, and augment and strengthen them where need be. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, what it has meant is that a lot of the work is still at a design and a capacity building state, but it hasn't reached the classrooms because our children aren't in the classrooms yet.
Right. Sunita ji, I think you had a question.
Well, just a few comments. I think, it was very insightful what Shweta has presented from the Central Square Foundation, which I think is playing a critical role in thinking about issues that are most urgent and pertinent in the case of education in our country and beyond, because I think the crisis education is facing is worldwide. Here, the problem is as pronounced also because the problem has been persistent, has been there for a long, long time, before the crisis, as Shweta has pointed out, and that solutions are there, but then because the children have not come to classes, they're not able to test and try those new exciting ideas that they've germinated during this COVID period, and there have been a lot of new ideas. So my comment would be that maybe there also needs to be a little more openness on behalf of the government, and I think we're seeing examples of that, where they allow people with new ideas, disruptive ideas, to come and try them out. Open door policy, because when the crisis is so bad, I think we can treat it as an emergency, and COVID-led illiteracy is a huge emergency. A child of class 5 would have been in class 3 2 years ago, and whatever he or may not have learned has already probably wiped away. So you're not just going to bring the child into class 5 today and teach him at class 5 level. You can actually probably begin at class 3, and that also not really. So we're talking about filling a very big gap here. So, and I think you've alluded to the fact that there should be intensive focus on FLN, and that would probably mean setting aside the goals of class level teaching to a future date, even though that's also necessary, that we deal with the most necessary first. Because if the children cannot read and they cannot write and they cannot do basic level of numeracy, how can they learn class 5 level stuff right now? So that being a case in point, it applies to all classes. So here we're dealing with the crises of huge proportions where disruptive solutions are required. So I think it's good that some state governments are being very, very open. We feel that here in UP, for example, they're extremely open to, and they have an open door policy that NGOs and others who want to really create something of a difference come forward and do so. So that's refreshing. And I think we need that because A, big problem exists, B, the problem is bigger, and C, it's still far away where we can get the children up to speed with their class level goals.
Very, very well said, Sunita. I will just add one layer to it. I think in addition to the open door policy, what we as NGOs also owe to the government is to help them support and strengthen the work that they're doing. Because we all know both from a budget perspective, from a scale perspective, and a sustainability perspective, eventually the role that the government can play and is playing becomes the most critical. And hence, everything that you said, right? The more innovative and the more disruptive ideas, how can they be integrated and how the government system is running early learning becomes very, very important. And that's where we feel that a formal launch of Nipun Bharat as a mission, where every state government will now be able to augment their early learning programs based on whatever is required in their context becomes very critical.
Very true, very true. I think this new impetus from the central government is definitely going to redirect energies in the direction where it's needed. And it needed an impetus. It's not just, oh, let's do it with the existing resources. Here are new resources available on the table. And I think that's encouraging. We're putting our money where it belongs.
One question which I had was also to do with the fervor of a mission, right? So in the past, when we have seen something like Swachh Bharat mission or a polio mission, or we have had a long movement on adult literacy as well. So we see a lot of volunteerism which is associated with missions, right? But here we are also talking about teacher capacity building, of talking about building content and pedagogical knowledge. So talking more about teacher training as well. So what is your opinion on what is the role of volunteers and voluntary organizations when it comes to really changing the destiny of foundational literacy, especially with respect to this mission? So Shweta, if you'd like to go first on that.
Sure, Mashood. I think the impetus that the mission provides us is it energizes the system and builds a momentum. The whole surround sound, the focus, the priority. And in Swachh Bharat, it's a brilliant example, right? The way it galvanizes and energizes the entire system towards one goal is second to none, right? And every cause for it to bring about fundamental change which sticks to the system, right, which is not just a pilot, which is not just here today, gone tomorrow, requires the government support in the form of a mission. So I think that's where it's very heartening, not just for I think your team or for CSF, but for every education NGO. That, like Sunita said, a problem that we have known, a problem that the Asar survey shines a spotlight on every year for the last 2 decades, has now got the due recognition in the education policy and has been adopted in the form of a mission. Specifically, what it means in terms of not just volunteers, right, but the work that different NGOs and CSOs are doing, how different foundations, donors, and philanthropists are also looking at. I think the collective effort coming together in an integrated manner to support whatever different states require for early learning to be achieved, right? Whether it's on teaching learning material, on professional development, on assessment systems, on technical solutions to support it. I think it's a big opportunity for the system, NGOs, CSOs, and philanthropy to come together towards realization of this in a sustainable manner, that it becomes system known and it actually fundamentally changes the floor level of where we are starting.
Right.
Mashood, go ahead with the next question.
Right. Shweta, one very interesting aspect which you covered in your presentation was about continuous disrupted learning, and different from the disruptive FLN that we are talking about, in terms of cycles of schools reopening, teaching, learning happening, and then possibly getting disrupted, and so we immediately have to shift gears towards home learning, right? And you've also talked about the experience of CSF and its partner organizations with education technology edtech for FLN. So if you look back at a post-COVID situation, what are your thoughts on what aspects of edtech have worked, and what would be the learnings, especially if you have to adapt to this new continuously potentially disrupted learning future that might be possible?
Sure, I think it's a very relevant question, a very critical question, which in many ways is still getting answered and solved for, right? And of course, uh, COVID meant that the demand for technology-enabled solutions for education in India became very, very high. But the reality is, Mashood, we know that most of the private tech solutions cater to the high income and mid income families in schools. Unfortunately, children going to government schools or low fee schools, for them to be able to have access to technology solution with support early learning, right? And we are talking about children actually getting access to a device, getting access to content which at the first level engages them, and then we get them to learning, right? These are households with at best one phone with WhatsApp access, but likely more than 2 or 3 children, and that device is a household device, it's not a learning device. So that's the reality of the world that we are operating in, or that we are trying to solve for. I think as CSF, we've always believed technology is a very powerful tool to augment learning of our children. It is not a silver bullet standalone which will get our children to learn, which will get our children to tide over the COVID missed and forgotten learning. However, it needs to be blended and leveraged effectively. And when I say blended, I think the post COVID world will need to be a blend of in school learning, which might be staggered, which might not be back to, you're coming to school 5 days a week and then just taking your summer and winter break. We might need staggered in school days. How do we blend the in school instruction with at home and community instruction, whether it's coming from a volunteer, whether once we have better vaccination coverage, it's coming from teachers and cluster coordinators being able to go into the community. And the third blend has to be, how can technology resources be used to support that? I think we've had some incredible examples of technology being leveraged for assessments. There are apps which have set up assessment boards. I briefly mentioned Convergenius and the work they did with in Maharashtra on an assessment board, right? How do we assess what is the current learning level of the child? And then we support them in their learning. Sunita spoke about UP. One of our partner organizations, Rocket Learn, they've also worked with LLF in the Haryana pilot. How can WhatsApp be leveraged to send assignments to children and also engage parents in supporting that learning at home? So I think we do have interesting pilots which have worked effectively. However, when we talk at a system level, right, when we are saying going forward, build back better, effort needs to be put both by NGOs as well as the system to design it in an integrated manner. If what's happening in school and in Mohalla and on a tech app, if they don't talk to each other, then we are not getting the optimal solution. So the responsibility to ensure it's coherent across all different modes and places of education is a responsibility that rests with the NGOs and the system to work together.
Say.
Right.
Yeah. So here I'd like to come in a bit and change the directions a little bit. The problem that we perceive today changes when COVID comes back, let's say in a big force again. A few weeks ago, everything looked so different than it does today. So we are talking about yin yang kind of a situation and an uncertain future. But imagine the scenario in which really, we're back to physical setting of schools, and all the technology and investment in devices and all that will probably not have as much meaning, because people will go back to square one the way they always taught. and they will continue to teach that way. Now, obviously, you will probably have some view on this, Shweta, but my concern also is that we need to look at deeper reforms that probably could be very beneficial for our country. For example, private public partnerships. We're talking about a lot of budget private schools really going under during this time frame, and a lot of kids on the street, they're just not going back to education, unfortunately, by the looks of it. All the years again bringing children back to school will probably need to redouble and so forth, but we're losing kids left, right, and center because they don't have a school anymore. They were running out of rented buildings they can't afford. And parents are really truly suffering. They don't have the funds to pay the private schools. So either the government schools speed up in the perception of how they're being, they're teaching and the children are learning, or we have a far bigger problem at hand. So PPP and also direct benefit transfer, DBTs, in lieu of a voucher. We were discussing yesterday with Manoj Rai, he's director of Women and Children's Welfare. And these kids who've been COVID affected are getting through the Mukhyamantri Bal Seva Yojana, they're getting some 4,000 rupees a month. Now, but these kids are not wanting to go to school, or the parents who are left over don't want the kids to go to school necessarily because their survival needs. So that money may not make it to the schools. So there are really big issues. Should the money then be only transferable to a school, and how much of it, and how much for survival? So these are big issues. I think that if you can, at the macro level, create yet another series of debates about these issues, could be a worthwhile thing to look into.
Yeah, no, very well captured, Sunita, especially the challenge that our budget private schools are facing and what is the future of those children. However, with your permission, I would want to go back to the first part of the comment that you made on technology solution. And I do think that all of us need to consciously seek the opportunity that COVID has presented to us to fundamentally change certain way that education is being done, by the system in our country. And that's where I do hope, and I'm strongly optimistic that investment, whether in devices, whether in solutions and apps and products which are relevant for early learning, for children not going to the mid-income and high-income, but to the government and low-income schools, actually continue to support that learning. I understand that the feeling from last year and this year has been a lot of these are first-line response, or if I may, a bandit solution. Schools band hain, chaliye app pe kuch kar lete hain. But we have to acknowledge and realize the immense value that they can give to us even in a normal state. Even if our children were back to being to school 5 days a week, the power of them having access to a device, a learning app, or practice sheets at home now significantly increases the learning time for the child. And how do we, so that's one aspect, that where we don't look at EdTech only as a first aid response to the crisis, but solutions which are sustainable, scalable, are showing efficacy. How do we integrate them into that? And a word popularly being used these days is physital. How does the physical and the digital come together as a systemic way going forward? I think the second, there are two other points I want to talk about in terms of fundamental shifts that I hope we see post-COVID. Second is the role of assessments. It becomes, and again, right, assessments in India for the long time got confused with examinations. It becomes high stake. It's like we are judging our children. No, the spirit is our children haven't been to school unless we are able to assess what is their current learning level. How will we get them back on that learning journey, right? If the children have, again, the APU studies spoke about learning competencies that have been lost on literacy or numeracy level. Pratham has always advocated for a teaching at a right level approach. We have partners who effectively use assessment, Language and Learning Foundation, Madhi, use assessment-informed instruction. And I do hope the value of assessment as a core component of instruction design becomes a fundamental shift that stays beyond COVID. And third is the role of parent and community. Somewhere the perception parents of children coming to a government school is that they don't have the age. इनमें समझ ही नहीं है, capability ही नहीं है. Now when children come couldn't come to school, we were able to lean on that parent and community to play that facilitator role. And again, like I said before, we are not transferring the responsibility for educating to the parent, but the parent plays a very critical enabling role in ensuring the child is going to school regularly, in ensuring if there is practice sheets to be done at home, if there are activities to be done at home, they are providing that environment. So I do hope, at least when it comes to technology solutions, assessment informed instruction, and the role of parent and community, that these are some fundamental shifts which strengthen our education system beyond COVID.
Very well said. Of course, I do agree with you. The only issue with regards to teaching at the right level, the concern is that if the teachers are adept at using that information to teach to the right level, because they tend to teach the class dynamic and not the individual dynamic. So that is a whole new skill. And I think we are talking about some new skills that have to be honed in. And they may all emerge from some kind of a belief system that the teachers have about learning. There's also the need of the hour, if you like, and every child needs to be up to grade with their FLN skills. And really, if we have a proposition for a 30-hour FLN, so if that is true and that can be made possible, then obviously we can go quickly on with that process and get everybody up to that point. And because teachers are more used to kind of teaching to a whole class dynamic, or maybe even in this case, have children of all ages sit together who don't have the reading capacity, for example, and you can gauge that fairly quickly. So yes, I mean, point about assessment taken, and the tools that are used for assessment, the online tools, are very powerful. They give immediate feedback, and the purpose of feedback is totally different than judgment. It is to propel the next level of learning and to go take the next action. So I think those are all absolutely germane, and they all start with, in my mind, the belief system. So teacher training, to what extent that's going to matter, and if it's done in isolation of a practicum, an experience that they're going to hold out immediately, then may not work out as well. So anyway, your thoughts on that, please.
No, completely. I mean, again, right, if there was ever doubt on the centrality of teacher in our education system, COVID's told us how much we are all dependent as a society on the incredible responsibility and work that our teachers do. And Sunita, I think you've raised the point in a very pertinent manner that at the end of the day, whatever gets designed as a solution, whether it's tech, whether it's assessment, whether it's better teaching learning material, whether it's a modular program or a thorough strategy, it has to be, at the end of the day, the delivery mechanism is the teacher. Like you said, right, teaching as a profession is practicum based. Of course, the theory is important. The fundamental principles and that knowledge is very, very important. But at the end of the day, how do I translate that knowledge and understanding in practice in classroom where my children becomes very important, right? And I think, again, a lot of work is already happening on making thinking of it not as teacher training, but continuous professional development, which is supported while the teachers are actually in the classroom, making it more experiential, making it more role play based. The support and mentoring that they need is in the practice, not in theoretically understanding the concept, but how do I take that concept and put it in practice in an average government school with all the challenges that we know will be there, right? Starting from infrastructure, starting from the fact that these children would not have had the benefit of a Bal Vatika equivalent program, starting from the fact that the home factors are probably a disruption and not a support to learning. So the role of teachers and how they are supported. And again, right, in COVID, the online teacher professional development has been very successful. A lot of state governments, a lot of NGOs have put in a lot of effort to ensure at least teachers are able to continue to upskill themselves. Now, what will be required is what you said, right? How is that supported in a practicum in classroom with children?
Right. Thank you, Shweta, for your perspectives on these. Some very important points that you made in terms of teacher capacity building, and how how organizations are also shifting their strategies regarding that, and you also being an expert in organizational development. A lot of stakeholders that are connected with us here at Detox are civil society organizations and grassroots organizations as well. Post-COVID, and the kind of reality that we are foreseeing also of continuous disrupted learning potentially. What would your advice be to them in terms of operations and strategies? How has CSF and its partner organizations, how have they shifted their operational strategies post-COVID, and what would your advice be to other civil society organizations working in the field of education and literacy?
Sure, that's a hard question, but first of all, specifically when you're saying that a lot of the audience and stakeholders associated with Detox are the grassroots CSOs and NGOs, I think first of all, I want to give them a big shout out and kudos for how they have supported the COVID response. I think it's common knowledge that with all due regards, while our government took time to get their act together, the way the NGOs and CSOs came to support, whether it's displacement of migrant labor, whether it was for home and shelter, food and shelter, and also for education. So I think well started is well begun. And so congratulations and kudos on that. I think some fundamental issues that have been tested through COVID, especially from if we take a organizational lens to it, Mashood, has been the big challenge of funding. Rightfully so, more and more funding has gotten redirected to COVID relief, towards health, and we will need for it to go towards livelihood and rehabilitation. And I think that's where all of us, all us NGOs and CSOs face the pressure from a funding perspective. How do we show the agility which responds to the new funding landscape that's available? I know a lot of funding was also made available for COVID relief, but the sustainability of that has not yet been established. I think more than a suggestion, my sincere request would be that in all the work that organizations are doing on the ground in the communities that they operate in, please ensure that the system becomes a part of the solution. India has incredible data on pilots that have happened in our education system, which show great efficacy and results. But I think the need of the hour is, how can those solutions be integrated into the system's way of working? Because scale and sustainability of the solutions will only come when they are system owned. No amount of capacity and philanthropy money available to NGOs can match what the government spends and invests in education. And if our best practices can be integrated, and so especially for early learning, where Nipun Bharat presents an opportunity for every state system to augment their early learning practices across the spectrum of role and professional development and dashboards and assessment and teaching learning. If we all become more conscious of integrating into the systems program for early learning, I think we will be able to solve the problem sooner, in a more effective manner, and most importantly, in a sustainable manner.
Yes.
Right. Sunita ji, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I'm totally going to echo what Shweta has said, because that's absolutely spot on, that any reform that's not systemic is not going to work out, and the results will be temporary. So we want things that are that have stay power, and I think systemic reform is the way to go forward. So I just want to underscore what Shweta said.
Right. Thank you, Shweta, for your comments on this as well. We have some questions from the audience. One question that we would like to bring here, Shifali Jaiswal is asking how to recreate FLN in primary schools in remote areas. I think this is also more from the perspective of, like you also mentioned about accessibility and equity, and especially if we are looking at remote areas that face many other challenges as well. So any thoughts on that?
No, Mashood, like you said, right, that the problem does become more complex and nuanced in remote areas. And I think that's where one of the suggestions we are putting out is the need for decentralization. See, the most powerful tool in our hands today is that our education system has got us the reach. Even in the remotest area, there is a school building, that infrastructure is available, staff is available. However, what's happened is either the children have dropped out, I mean, of course, children are anyways not coming, but we'll face the problem of children having dropped out due to displacement, due to economic hardship. I think, again, right, a solution which gets designed by the state and in a decentralized manner can be implemented in the context of those remote areas. At the end of the day, the way the local ecosystem understands the needs of that area become the most important, and that needs to be leveraged more effectively. Of course, first and foremost, I do hope that even when we are talking of the remote areas, the vaccination coverage and COVID appropriate protocols reach those places, because we need to ensure safety is in place before we start getting our children and teachers back to school.
Great. Thank you, Shweta, for answering this question. I think one concluding question that we also had was we are talking about the national education's vision, national education policy's vision to achieve elementary, complete universal foundational literacy and numeracy in elementary education. And now we have more clarity on this with the Nipun Bharat mission as well. So a challenge which lies in front of us is also about children who are now enrolled in beyond the foundation level. Maybe they've moved on to grades beyond grade 3 as well, up to grade 8. And this is what a lot of the surveys also, like we mentioned, the achievement survey and ASER survey, and even NEP is also talking about many children beyond these foundation levels might also be lacking some of these skills. So when we are talking about approach, what should be the best approach to bringing these children who are now beyond the foundation level and developing these skills in a quick manner? Any practices, best practices, or thoughts which you would like to share, which can be integrated in a system approach? Yeah.
No, of course. And Mashood, which is why, again, I'll go back to one of the recommendations I spoke about, the need for a school readiness program. And I think the school readiness program, I did, share it more from the perspective of early grades. But we have to accept that even if a child is in grade 9, she last went to school in a child will come to grade 9 next year. Let's assume schools will hardly be functional in person this year, right? Last, this child came to school in grade 7, totally missed grade 8 due to the first and second wave. Hopefully, as things stabilize, we cover vaccination, gets some staggered in school learning for grade 8, right? Even in the limited days that the child is able to come to school in grade 8, or when a new normal gets established for grade 9, what sits under that school readiness program needs to be the social, emotional, and mental well-being. Almost a capsule of early literacy, right? How do we ensure everyone is reading with meaning and has the basic arithmetic sense? Because if we haven't figured the basic arithmetic and BODMAS, how can we expect our children to go to trigonometry and permutation, combinations, and probability in higher school, right? And a third, acknowledging that the missed and forgotten learning will no longer be a remediation solution. Unfortunately, historically, we have always resorted to a remediation program to say, whatever got missed, we'll catch up through a remediation program. We need to fundamentally look at our curriculum, give the due respect to the disruption that COVID has caused in our learning, and not pretend that we can make up for it in a few months. So a school readiness which addresses the social, emotional, and mental well-being, almost a revision of sorts, even in middle and high school, on the basic competencies required for them to consume the curriculum, and then prioritizing the curriculum to make up for the missed instruction time over what could be upwards of a year and a half.
Yes, very true. And so maybe more joyful learning is what you're saying. That emotionally connects with the children, brings them to school. They feel fun about coming. Research shows that boredom is a negative in terms of getting the children to school. And if learning is taking place, then obviously the children will come. We notice that even in the best of schools, that year-on-year learning is not so great. And John Hattie speaks about it in his research work. So, and that's world over. And here, we need to make sure somehow that not just learning is happening, that it is measurable to the child as much as to the adult. And they can see, oh, I'm learning. I've gained so much. So anyway, those are the new directions we can all look forward to. So over to Mashood for final concluding comments. Thank you, Shweta ji, for being with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Shweta ji, for joining us. And you really helped us kind of demystify what foundational literacy and numeracy under, as a system. When we are talking about systemic reform, how what it means conceptually and in practice also. You've really shared a lot of learnings in terms of what has worked, what can be better, what are the learnings, and set a very solid roadmap in terms of how we can organize and prepare ourselves for a situation where learning might continuously get disrupted over time. So thank you so much for sharing that. We would also like to thank Dr. Sunita Gandhi as well for sharing her questions and comments, and to all the live audience members for joining us. We also hope that those who will be watching this video are able to kind of it'll trigger a lot of thoughts and ideas in their head as well, and they'll also be more excited to join the hashtag FLN, disruptive FLN movement as well. So thank you once again, and we'll meet you in the next detox. Thank you.